The roots of the goat-licking torture method can be traced back to ancient and medieval societies where public displays of punishment were common. While the exact origin remains unclear, historical accounts suggest its use in parts of Europe during the Middle Ages. It's believed to have been employed by rulers, inquisitors, and even military leaders as a means of extracting confessions or enforcing control. In some regions, it was used as a punishment for thieves, traitors, or those accused of blasphemy. The goat-licking method was as unsettling as it was ingenious. It relied on the natural instincts of a goat and turned them into a mechanism of pain. The process began with the victim being restrained, usually tied to a post or a flat surface, to prevent any movement. This was crucial, not just to maintain control, but to heighten the feeling of helplessness. Next, the victim's skin, typically on sensitive areas like the feet, stomach, or even the face, was smeared with salt. Salt wasn't chosen randomly. It's a substance that naturally attracts animals, and its coarse texture made the experience even more excruciating. Once the salt was applied, a goat, an otherwise harmless creature, was brought into the scene. Goats are known for their insatiable curiosity and love for licking salty surfaces. As the goat began to lick the victim's skin, it might have even felt amusing at first, almost ticklish. But this initial sensation quickly turned into unbearable pain. The rough texture of the goat's tongue, designed to scrape food off tough surfaces, started to irritate and tear the skin. With repeated licking, the skin would break, leading to bleeding and excruciating discomfort. The torture was slow and deliberate. It could last for hours, with the victim unable to escape the relentless licking. The psychological torment was just as severe as the physical pain. The idea of being tortured by something so innocent added a layer of humiliation that broke even the strongest of wills. In some cases, this method was used not just to punish but to extract confessions. The slow, escalating agony left the victim desperate for relief, often leading them to admit guilt, whether or not they were truly at fault. It was a grim reminder of how even the most benign aspects of nature could be twisted into tools of suffering. While the goat-licking torture method may seem like a grotesque myth, it was indeed used in certain historical contexts, and its impact left a lasting impression. Historical records and folklore mention such practices, although the specific details and names of victims are often shrouded in obscurity. One of the more notable instances comes from the medieval period, where it was employed in some European regions during times of political or religious persecution. It was used as a punishment for thieves, suspected witches, and even those accused of blasphemy or treason. One recorded account from the 15th century mentions that the method was part of the inquisitorial toolkit during witch trials. In these dark times, the authorities often sought ways to extract confessions from accused witches, and the goat-licking method became one of the more creative, albeit cruel, ways to break their spirit. The story, though not well documented, tells of a woman accused of witchcraft in a small village. She was tied down, and salt was smeared on her body. A goat was then brought to lick her skin. According to the account, her screams echoed throughout the village, signaling her suffering and the cruelty of the act. Though such instances were relatively rare compared to other forms of torture, the very fact that this method existed speaks to the ingenuity and brutality of those in power during these periods. The goat-licking torture method was not just about the physical harm it inflicted. It was a psychological nightmare. The very idea of being subjected to such an absurd and bizarre form of torture contributed to the mental breakdown of the victim. The victim would likely have felt an overwhelming sense of powerlessness, knowing that a harmless animal was the source of their suffering. This surreal aspect of the torture, being punished by a creature often associated with innocence, amplified the humiliation and shame. Physically, the impact of the goat's rough tongue was excruciating. The constant licking, combined with the salt, would cause deep abrasions to form on the skin. Over time, these wounds would worsen, leading to open sores, infection, and in some cases, severe bleeding. The areas that were licked would become raw, swollen, and prone to scarring. The prolonged exposure to this form of torture could lead to permanent physical damage, including nerve damage and even gangrene, if the wounds were left untreated. The mental toll was just as severe. The victim was not only in constant physical agony, but also trapped in a prolonged state of torment. The psychological effect of being helpless and slowly broken down by something so unexpected could lead to long-term trauma. The trauma was not just about the pain, but about the vulnerability of being tortured in such a degrading and humiliating way. The victim's dignity was stripped away piece by piece, making it not just a form of punishment, but a weapon designed to destroy the very spirit of the person. In many cases, the victim would begin to lose their sense of time, overwhelmed by the constant licking, the pain, and the hopelessness. This method was intended to break not just the body, but the mind, leaving the victim in a state of confusion, desperation, and fear. The use of a goat in this form of torture brings up an unsettling layer of symbolism. Goats, often seen as innocent, harmless creatures, are typically associated with the rustic, the natural, and even with innocence in many cultures. However, when used in torture, the goat becomes a symbol of how innocence can be perverted for evil purposes. The goat-licking torture method forces us to confront the unsettling reality that cruelty can be disguised in the form of something seemingly harmless, even beautiful. Morally, the act reflects how power can corrupt and how inventive cruelty can become in the absence of empathy. As time passed and more progressive attitudes began to emerge, the goat-licking torture method eventually fell out of favor. During the Enlightenment and the subsequent rise of human rights laws, practices like torture started to be viewed with increasing horror. The development of more modern legal systems also led to the rejection of these barbaric methods of punishment. In the 19th and 20th centuries, as countries began to adopt laws against cruel and unusual punishment, the goat-licking method faded into obscurity. It became a relic of a darker, compassionate time. Today, with the establishment of global human rights standards and international treaties banning torture, such methods are unthinkable in the modern world. However, the psychological scars of such practices can still resonate through history. The stories of those who suffered from these methods are important reminders of the depths of cruelty humans are capable of when unchecked. By learning about these horrors, we ensure they are never repeated.